Friday night in Washington smelled of expensive whiskey, cigars, and political promises. The ballroom of the Mayflower Hotel was abuzz with voices, the clinking of glasses mingling with muffled laughter, and the whispers of deals that would make headlines tomorrow. Kyle Hartwell stood at the window, looking at the lights of the Capitol in the distance. His black tuxedo fit perfectly, like everything else in his life, at least it seemed so from the outside. Tall, with sharp features and light gray at the temples, he looked like a man who knows what he wants and always gets it. But today a shadow of anxiety flashed in his gray eyes, which he himself could not yet explain. "Kyle, you're hiding by the window again." Celeste's voice was soft as silk, but with a hint of reproach. She came up behind him, placing her hand on his shoulder. Her dress navy blue, with a neckline that showed off every curve, cost more than the average American's annual salary. Celeste Hartvale was a woman who was noticed. Her blonde hair was styled in loose waves, her sea-green eyes sparkled, but there was always something elusive about them. Kyle turned to her, giving her the smile he had learned over years in court and at receptions. "I'm not hiding, I'm just thinking," he said, raising his glass of bourbon. "You know how much I love these evenings." She rolled her eyes, but smiled back. "Liar. You can't stand these gatherings. But for Papa Gideon's sake, you're willing to play the perfect son." Kyle chuckled. She was right, as always. Tonight was not just another social event. It was a triumph for Senator Gideon Hartvale, Kyle's father. After 10 years in the Senate, he finally won passage of the health reform bill, which was called the Hartvale Legacy. The press had already dubbed him a hero, and his opponents were gritting their teeth in their offices. And of course, the whole family had to show up to maintain this facade of perfection. "By the way, where is Declan?" Kyle asked, looking around the room. His best friend, Declan Forsyth, promised to be here. A political consultant with the face of a movie star and the mind of a Machiavelli, he always showed up late, but with a bang. Celeste tensed slightly. The movement was almost imperceptible, but Kyle caught it. She adjusted her earring and answered a little faster than usual. "Oh, you know Declan. Probably stuck in traffic or flirting with some congressional intern." Kyle laughed, but something in her tone pricked him. He brushed aside the thought Celeste and Declan had known each other for 100 years, ever since Kyle brought her into his circle. They were part of his life, his foundation. "Kyle, Celeste." Gideon Hartvale's loud voice cut through the noise of the hall. The senator walked towards them, surrounded by a retinue of aides and journalists. At 65, he looked like a man who could silence an entire room with just a glance. Tall, with thick gray hair and an aquiline nose, he radiated authority. Walking next to him was Marion, his wife and mother Kayla, in a burgundy dress, with perfect posture and a smile that never reached her eyes. "You two are the highlight of the evening," Gideon said, clapping Kyle on the shoulder. "The press is already asking when you will go into politics, son. A career in law is all well and good, but the Hartvales are destined for more." "I'll think about it, Dad," Kyle answered with slight irony. He had heard this conversation 1,000 times. Gideon dreamed of seeing him in the Senate, but Kyle preferred to win cases in the courts rather than votes in elections. Marion looked at Celeste, her gaze sliding over the dress. "You look amazing, honey. Is this from Valentino?" "Yes, thank you," Celeste smiled, but there was a slight tension in her voice. Marion was always cold towards her, although she hid it behind compliments. As Gideon talked about his victory in the Senate, Kyle noticed the crowd parting. Declan Forsyth entered the hall, wearing a dark gray suit, with the top button of his shirt casually undone, and that same smile that could convince anyone of anything. The women in the audience turned around, the men shook his hands. He was a star in this world of intrigue, and Kyle was proud to call him a friend. Finally, Forsyth, Kyle said as Declan approached, "I thought you decided to skip the main event of the year." "And miss the chance to drink with Gideon?" "Never," Declan winked, shaking Kyle's hand. He then turned to Celeste. "You, as always, outshine everyone, Cel." She laughed, a little too long, and Kyle felt the sting again. There was something in the way Declan looked at her that wasn't just friendly warmth, but something more. He pushed the thought away, chalking it up to fatigue. Okay, you three, stop chatting, Marion intervened. Gideon, it's time to make a speech. Kyle, Celeste, go to the stage, let everyone see the family. They obediently moved towards the center of the hall. Gideon stepped up to the podium, and the crowd fell silent. His voice boomed, full of confidence. Today, we celebrate more than just the law. We celebrate family. The Hartvales have always been a pillar of this country, and I am proud that my children continue that legacy. Kyle stood next to Celeste, feeling her hand in his. She was cold, despite the warm air of the hall. He glanced at Declan, who was standing slightly off to the side, clapping along with the crowd. Their eyes met, and for a second Kyle thought Declan was looking not at Gideon, but at Celeste. The speech ended with a standing ovation. Gideon came down to the family, and a series of photographs began. Kyle smiled, posed, and answered questions from journalists. But his thoughts were already somewhere far away. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something about this perfect evening felt false. Later, when the guests began to leave, Kyle went to the bar for another bourbon. Celeste stayed with Marion, discussing a charity dinner, and Declan disappeared somewhere. Kyle took a sip, feeling the alcohol burn his throat. He didn't notice Rowan, his little sister, coming up behind him. "You look like you want to kill someone," she said, crossing her arms. Rowan was the complete opposite of the family. Short dark hair, a denim jacket instead of a dress, and a look that always told the truth, even when no one wanted to hear it. "Just tired, Ro," Kyle replied, trying to smile. "Don't lie to me," she narrowed her eyes. "Something is wrong. I see it in your eyes." He wanted to brush it off, but her words hurt him. Rowan was always the only one who understood him without words. "It's okay. There's just too many Hartvales in one place." She chuckled, but didn't back down. "If something happens, you know where to find me." He nodded, looking after her as she walked towards the exit. When he returned to Celeste, she was standing at the champagne table, talking to some congressman. Declan was close again, too close, his hand accidentally touching her shoulder. Celeste didn't move away. Kyle froze, watching. It was a small thing, nonsense. But why then was his heart beating so fast? "Let's go home," he said, approaching her. His voice was harsher than he intended. Celeste looked at him, surprised. "Already? But the evening is not over yet." "I'm tired," he repeated, looking into her eyes. "And you, it seems, too." She shrugged, said goodbye to Declan, and took his arm. On the way out, Kyle took one last look at the hall. Declan watched them leave, and there was something in his smile that Kyle had not noticed before. Saturday morning in the Hartvale house was quiet, as if the night on the Mayflower had remained somewhere in another world. Kyle sat at the kitchen island, leafing through the morning newspaper. The headlines were full of Gideon's name and his triumph. The coffee in his cup had long since cooled, but he didn't notice. His thoughts were occupied with other things. The way Celeste looked at Declan, her cold hand in his, the way she laughed a little longer than necessary. He tried to convince himself that this was nonsense, that he was just tired of the noise and hypocrisy of last night. But something inside didn't give me peace. Celeste came downstairs in a silk robe, her hair pulled back into a messy bun. "You got up early," she said without looking at him. Her voice was light, almost carefree. "Usually after such evenings you sleep until noon." Kyle folded the newspaper, placing it on the table with a little more force than necessary. "I couldn't sleep. Too many thoughts." She finally looked at him, raising an eyebrow. "What can you think about after yesterday? It was a success. Your father was on a roll. Everyone was talking about the Hartvales." "Yes, the Hartvales." Kyle took a sip of iced coffee, not taking his eyes off her. "Always in the spotlight. Did you have fun?" Celeste froze for a second, her hand holding the glass of juice, stopping halfway to her mouth. She smiled, but the smile came out forced. "Certainly. It was an important evening. I worked on your father's image as much as you did in your courts." "Why are you asking?" "Just like that," Kyle shrugged, but his tone was as sharp as a blade. "You looked animated, especially when Declan showed up." She put the glass on the table, a little louder than necessary. Declan. Jesus, Kyle, are you serious? He's your best friend. We've all known each other for a long time. What do you want to say? Nothing. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. I just noticed how you looked at each other. It was like you had your own little secret. Celeste laughed, but it was dry, almost nervous. You're making it up. Fatigue makes you suspicious. Maybe you should take a day off. We could go out of town and relax. Kyle didn't answer. He looked at her, trying to catch at least something, the trembling in his voice, the shadow in his eyes. But she held on as always. Celeste was a master of control, which is one of the reasons why her PR agency flourished. She knew how to sell any story, even one in which she herself was the main character. I'll think about it, he finally said, getting up from the table. I need to go to the office. Things don't wait. On Saturday, she frowned. You said that after the evening you would take a break. I changed my mind. Kyle took the keys from the counter and headed towards the door. Don't expect me for lunch. She said something after him, but he no longer listened. Last night was replaying in his head, and the more he thought, the less paranoid it seemed. Kyle's office was in downtown Washington, in a marble-fronted building overlooking the Potomac. His law firm, Hartvale and Associates, was one of the best in the city, a place where he felt like a master. Today, however, even the familiar smell of leather chairs and coffee from the waiting room did not bring relief. He threw his briefcase on the table and collapsed into a chair, staring at the ceiling. The phone vibrated on the table. Message from Declan. Great evening last night. Gideon is a legend. Are you okay? Looked stressed. Kyle clenched his jaw. Tense? Yes, he was tense. And Declan seemed to know why. Or is this just a friendly concern? He started to type a response, but stopped. Instead, he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a second phone, an old one, the one he kept for personal matters. Celeste's number was first on the contact list. He opened their correspondence over the past weeks. Nothing out of the ordinary: dinner plans, appointment reminders, a couple of links to fashion articles she forwarded to him. But something caught his attention, a message from yesterday morning. Don't forget about the evening. It will be fun. D. Kyle frowned. D. She never shortened his name to just one letter. This message was not sent to him. Who did she write to? Declan? Or is this just a typo? The office door opened and his assistant, Clara, entered, a young woman with a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue. I thought you were taking the day off, boss, she said, placing a stack of files in front of him. Did something happen? Nothing happened, Kyle muttered, putting the phone in his pocket. I just decided to take care of business. Clara narrowed her eyes, but remained silent. She knew him too well to argue. Okay, here are the documents on Winston's case. Court on Monday. And your father called. He wants to meet tomorrow. Great, Kyle rubbed his temples. Gideon, of course, won't give him peace after yesterday. Thank you, Clara. I'll figure it out. She left, and Kyle was left alone. Yesterday, on the way home, he took Celeste's phone out of her bag when she fell asleep in the car on the way home. It was an impulsive decision, and he still didn't know why he did it. He turned it on, entered the password, their wedding date, which she had never changed, and started digging. Nothing at first. Messages from colleagues, from mother, from friends. But then he found a chain with a D. No name, just a letter. The messages were short, but their tone was jarring. Meet me at 7, same place. I can't wait. He didn't notice anything. Relax. Kyle felt the blood rush to his face. He scrolled further. The last message was yesterday. You looked amazing. I wish he was around. His hand shook. He? Who is this? Himself? Someone else? But my intuition told me the answer, and that answer was Declan Forsyth, his best friend. The man he shared a beer with after college, who was best man at their wedding. It was impossible. And yet, he stood up, went to the window, and stared at the river. I needed to calm down. Maybe it's a mistake. Maybe D is someone else. But he knew Celeste. She's not one to leave marks by accident. If she didn't delete it, it means she was too confident in herself. There was a knock on the door. Kyle turned around, and it was Rowan. She walked in uninvited, as always, with a bottle of water in her hand and a skeptical expression on her face. "I was at your house, but Celeste said that you were at work seriously on Saturday. You look like crap," she said, sitting down on the edge of the table. "What's happened?" "Nothing," Kyle returned to the chair, trying to keep his voice even. "Just work." "You're lying," Rowan crossed her arms. "I saw you yesterday. You were out of your element. Is it because of Celeste?" He froze. Rowan had always seen right through him, but now it was too close to the truth. "Why are you asking about her?" His voice became harsher. "Because she was acting strange," Rowan shrugged. "Smiled too much, talked too much to Declan." "I'm not blind, Kyle." He was silent, looking at her. Rowan didn't know. She couldn't know. But her words were like a knife stabbing into an already open wound. "Did you see something?" he asked finally. "Nothing specific." She took a sip of water. "Just a feeling. You know I don't trust her. I never trusted it." "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Kyle leaned forward. His voice became low, almost threatening. "Because you wouldn't believe it." Rowan looked into his eyes. "You love her, and almost all lovers are blind. But if there's something wrong, Kyle, you need to find out." "Myself." He nodded, at a loss for words. Rowan stood up and said one last time, "I'm on your side. Always. Call me if anything happens." When she left, Kyle realized that it was time to act, but not now. First, he had to make sure. And if it was true, he didn't even know what he would do. I didn't know yet. The Sunday afternoon at the Hartvale Mansion in Georgetown was as polished as their public image. Kyle sat in the living room, clutching a glass of water. He had refused wine, despite his mother's persistent suggestions. He needed to keep his head clear. After yesterday, after what he found on Celeste's phone, he felt like a man walking on thin ice. One wrong step and everything will collapse. Celeste sat opposite, leafing through a magazine on the sofa. She looked relaxed, wearing a white blouse and trousers, with her legs tucked under her. Her calmness infuriated Kyle. How could she sit here, pretend like nothing was happening? He looked at her, trying to find even the slightest hint of guilt, but she was impenetrable. Or did he just not want to see the truth before? "Kyle, you're quiet today." Marian's voice pulled him out of his thoughts. She walked into the room with a tray of snacks, her heels clicking on the floor. At 62, she looked 10 years younger, the result of strict discipline and expensive beauticians. "Is it because of work? Or are you still worried about Friday night?" "I was just thinking." Kyle forced himself to smile, but it turned out crooked. "It's okay, Mom." Marian placed the tray on the table and looked at him with that mixture of care and control that he had known since childhood. "You always say that when something is wrong. I'm your mother, I see." "Leave him alone, Marian." Gideon appeared in the doorway, straightening the cuffs of his shirt. His presence filled the room as it always did. "The boy is just tired. These evenings exhaust anyone." Kyle gritted his teeth. Boy. He was 40, and Gideon still talked to him like he was a teenager. He wanted to answer, but remained silent. This is not what he came for today. He needed to see if they knew. Rowan hinted that Celeste was acting strange, but what if it wasn't just his suspicions? "Where is Rowan?" he asked, changing the subject. "He's late, as usual." Marian rolled her eyes, sitting down in a chair. This girl never respected family traditions. "She'll come," Gideon said, pouring himself a glass of whiskey from a crystal decanter. "She better come. Today is an important day." Celeste looked up from the magazine. "Important? Are you planning something, Gideon?" "I always plan," the senator grinned, but there was steel in his voice. "We must discuss the future. Mine, Kayla, the whole family. This law is just the beginning." Kyle felt the tension in the room thicken. Gideon loved this kind of talk, confronting everyone with a fait accompli, reminding everyone who was in charge. But today Kyle was not in the mood to play obedient son. He put his glass down and looked at his father. What is the future, Dad? You have already received your law. What more do you want? Gideon narrowed his eyes, clearly not expecting such a tone. I want you to take your seat, Kyle. Stop hiding in the courts. Politics is our lifeblood. I'm not hiding, Kyle spoke quietly, but there was a threat in his voice. I do what I like. Not everyone wants a Senate seat. Marion intervened, her tone soft but commanding. Kyle, your father just wants what's best for you. For all of us. We are the Hartvales. It means something. Yes, that means we have to always look perfect. He couldn't help himself. His words came out faster than he could think. Even when everything is rotting inside. Celeste looked up, her face becoming serious. What do you mean, Kyle? He looked at her, and for a second he wanted to spill everything. But instead he said, nothing. Just tired of facades. There was silence. Gideon took a sip of whiskey. Marion straightened the crease in her dress. Celeste returned to the magazine, but her fingers were trembling slightly. Kyle noticed this. She was nervous. Why? The door slammed and Rowan burst into the room. Her jeans were torn at the knee and her Truth Hurts t-shirt looked like a challenge to all that luxury. She dropped her backpack on the floor and plopped down on the couch next to Celeste. Sorry for being late. Traffic jams. What did I miss? Nothing special. Marion pursed her lips. Your brother just decided to play philosopher. Rowan looked at Kyle, her eyebrows rising. Wow. What's wrong with you? You look like you swallowed a lemon. Thanks for your support, Ro, Kyle chuckled, but there was no warmth in his voice. Just a family conversation. Yeah, as always, she took an olive from the tray and threw it into her mouth. Dad wants you to become a senator, Mom wants you to smile, and you want everyone to leave. Did you guess right? Gideon coughed, clearly annoyed. Rowan, stop making jokes. This is serious. The family must be united, especially now. United. Rowan crossed her arms. Is this when we all pretend we have no secrets? Because if so, then I pass. Kyle tensed. Secrets. She said it again. He looked at her, trying to catch her eye, but Rowan had already turned to Gideon. What do you mean, Rowan? He asked, trying to sound casual. Nothing specific, she shrugged, but something sharp flashed in her eyes. Just an observation. Everyone has something to hide, right? Marion stood up abruptly, her movements too fast for a normal Sunday dinner. Enough, Rowan. You always start these games of yours. Let's just eat and talk about something nice. About what, Mom? Rowan didn't back down. About how Dad will save America, or how will Celeste save her dad's reputation. Celeste threw the magazine onto the table, her voice becoming cold. If you have something to say, Rowan, say it straight. I'm tired of your hints. Oh, I'm just kidding, Rowan smirked, but there was something venomous in her tone. You know I'm not one to dig up dirt. This is more for journalists. Kyle looked at them, feeling the air in the room become heavy. Rowan knew something, or suspected something. But what, and why didn't she tell him directly? He turned his gaze to Gideon. He was silent, but his fingers were squeezing the glass a little tighter than necessary. Marion nervously fiddled with the ring on her finger. Celeste. She looked calm, but her eyes moved. Okay, that's enough. Gideon put his glass down on the table with a loud thud. We gathered to eat, not to conduct an interrogation. Kyle, Celeste, Rowan sit down at the table. Marion, call the servants. Dinner passed in tense silence, interrupted only by the clinking of forks and occasional remarks about the weather. Kyle ate mechanically, without feeling the taste. His thoughts revolved around Rowan's words. Secrets. If she's right, then this isn't just about Celeste and Declan. It's about the whole family. But how far did they go to maintain their perfect image? After dinner, Gideon went to his office, Marion took care of the dishes, and Celeste said that she had to make a work call. Kyle stayed with Rowan in the living room. She sat with her feet up on the coffee table and scrolled through her phone. You know something, he said quietly, sitting down next to her. She didn't look up. Maybe. Rowan, he leaned closer. If it's about Celeste, tell me. Right now. She finally looked at him, her gaze hard. "I'm not sure, Kyle, but I saw her whispering to Declan that evening, and more than once. And then her mother pulled her aside and they argued. I didn't hear what it was about, but it was strange." "Why didn't you tell me right away?" His voice became sharper. "Because I didn't want to be the one to break your heart." Rowan put the phone down. "But if you yourself suspect something, then dig. Just don't ask Mom or Dad. They will never tell the truth if it could harm the family's reputation." Kyle nodded, feeling his insides clench. He got up, went to the window, and looked out onto the street. Celeste stood by the car, talking on the phone. She laughed, and this laughter cut him like a knife. When they got home, Celeste went to bed and Kyle stayed downstairs. He took out her phone. It was necessary to dig deeper, and he knew where to start. Monday began with rain, which hammered on the windows of the Hartvale house as if trying to get inside. Kyle stayed up most of the night, sitting in the living room with Celeste's phone in his hands. He scrolled through every message, every photo, every note, but found nothing new. The same correspondence with D, the photo in the cafe, the same hints that could mean everything or nothing. Fatigue was buzzing in his head, but he couldn't stop. It was like an itch that couldn't be scratched. The more he dug, the more he wanted to know the truth. Celeste left for work early, throwing him a casual "see you tonight" over her shoulder. She looked as usual, collected, confident, with a slight smile that had seemed warm to him before, but now looked fake. Kyle didn't answer. He waited for the front door to slam, for the sound of her heels to fade on the porch. Only then did he get up, take the keys, and head into the city. Austin Crow's office was in a nondescript building on the outskirts of Washington, in an area where skyscrapers gave way to old brick houses with peeling paint. Kyle found his name on the sign at the entrance: Crow, private investigator, faded and pasted crookedly. He walked up the narrow stairs, feeling the smell of dampness and cigarette smoke permeate the air. It was a long way from the marble halls of his firm, but it was here that need brought him. The door was ajar. Kyle knocked, but didn't wait for an answer and entered. The room was small, littered with papers and empty coffee cups. At the table sat a man of about 48, with short dark hair touched with gray, and a face on which a mixture of cynicism and fatigue was visible. Austin Crow looked like a man who had seen too much and was no longer surprised by anything. He looked up from his laptop as Kyle walked in, his lips forming into a crooked grin. "You must be Hartvale," he said, leaning back in his chair. His voice was husky, with a slight southern accent. "You look like a guy in trouble. Sit down." Kyle nodded, closed the door, and sat down on the chair opposite. The chair creaked under his weight, but he paid no attention. "I need help," he said without preamble, "and they told me that you are the best in this matter." "Who said?" Austin narrowed his eyes, but interest flashed in his eyes. "One of my clients. It doesn't matter who. What's important is that I need you to find out something." Austin took a cigarette from the pack on the table, but did not light it, but simply swirled it in his fingers. "I don't take on things until I know what I'm getting into. So put it out there, Hartvale. What's wrong with you? Is your wife cheating? Is your business partner stealing? Or did the senator's dad get into trouble?" Kyle clenched his jaw. This guy was straightforward, and he liked it, but the words about his wife hurt. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "My wife, Celeste. I think she's having an affair, and I want to know with whom and for how long." Austin chuckled, finally lighting his cigarette. Smoke slowly rose to the ceiling, adding even more gloom to the room. "Classic. All wives lie, Hartvale. The question is how far yours has gone. Do you have evidence or just a hunch? Correspondence with someone under the initial D. Photo with a man in a cafe. I think it's my friend, Declan Forsyth, but I need more. Do you want me to follow her? Behind him? For both?" "For both." Kyle spoke quietly but firmly. "I want to know everything. Where do they meet? When? How often? And if there is anything else, any details." Austin took a drag from his cigarette, blowing the smoke out through his nose. "What if I find something you don't like? Are you ready for this? Because, judging by your appearance, You are already on the edge. Kyle clenched his fists, but nodded. I can handle it. I need the truth. How much will it cost? 2,000 in advance, plus 100 a day while I'm working, Austin shrugged. And no checks. Cash or transfer. I don't like tracks. We agreed. Kyle took out his wallet, counted out the money, and put it on the table. Start today. Austin shoveled the bills into the drawer without even counting them. Fine. Give me names, addresses, habits, everything you know about your wife and this Declan guy. The more you give, the faster I'll figure it out. Kyle began to speak. He talked about Celeste, her job at a PR agency on K Street, her habit of drinking lattes at the coffee shop across the street from her office, her meeting schedule. About Declan, his office in the center, his love for expensive bars, his manner of showing up everywhere late. He spoke dryly, as if in court, but inside everything was seething. Every fact that he gave out was like another nail in the coffin of his and Celeste's life. Austin wrote something down on a notepad, nodding every now and then. When Kyle finished, the detective put down his pen and looked at him. Are you sure you want to know this? Because once I start, there's no turning back. I will find everything, Hartvale, and it could be worse than you think. I'm sure. Kyle met his gaze. I need to know. Okay, Austin put out his cigarette in the overflowing ashtray. Then give me a couple of days. Kyle nodded, standing up. Call as soon as there is something. Definitely, Austin grinned. And Hartvale, don't do anything stupid while I'm working. You look like a guy who can make a mess. Kyle didn't answer. He left the office, walked down the stairs, and stood outside in the rain. Water ran down his face, but he didn't notice. For the first time in days, he felt something resembling control. Austin will find the truth. What he will do with her is another question. The day passed in a blur. Kyle returned to the office, met with the client, signed the papers, but his thoughts were somewhere else. He imagined Celeste with Declan in a cafe, in a car, in some hotel. Pictures flashed through his head, and each time he squeezed the pen a little tighter until it cracked in his hand. Clara noticed. Are you okay, boss? She asked, picking up the broken pen. You are not yourself today. It's okay, he lied, betraying a smile. Just a busy day. She didn't believe it, but didn't argue. After she left, Kyle took out his phone and texted Rowan. Shall we meet in the evening? We need to talk. The answer came a minute later. 7 p.m., bar on 14th. You pay. Kyle chuckled. Rowan was the only person he could trust, and if Austin finds something, she'll help him figure it out. In the evening, he sat in the corner of the bar, a noisy place with wooden tables and dim lighting. Rowan arrived on time, her hair wet from the rain and the same cheeky smile. She ordered a beer and sat down opposite. Well, what do you have? She asked without further ado. I hired a detective. Kyle took a sip of whiskey. To keep an eye on Celeste. Rowan whistled. Seriously? You're not kidding. And what did you find? Nothing yet, he said about the phone, about the messages, about the photo. But I feel like it's him. And I want to know how far it goes. She nodded, twirling the bottle in her hands. I'm not surprised. Declan was always slippery, and Celeste. She's too good at seeming perfect. But are you sure you want to dig this out? Yes, Kyle looked into her eyes. Do you know something? You hinted yesterday. Rowan sighed, putting her beer down. I don't know for sure, but I heard Mom whispering to Dad a couple of weeks ago. They mentioned Celeste and the problem. I didn't delve into it. I thought it was about her work. Now I'm not sure. Kyle felt his blood freeze in his veins. Did they know? And they were silent. Maybe, Rowan shrugged. You know them. Reputation matters most. If Celeste is sleeping with Declan, they'd rather pay him than tell you. He was silent, digesting this. Family. His own family. If Rowan is right, then the betrayal is deeper than he thought. Thank you, Ro, he said finally. You're the only one who doesn't lie. Always, she raised the bottle in a toast. Just be careful. If this is true, they won't give up without a fight. Kyle nodded. He knew that the battle had already begun. and he wasn't going to lose. Kyle wasn't expecting a call from Austin Crowe so soon. Only 2 days had passed since their meeting, and he had already become accustomed to the idea that the investigation would drag on. But on Wednesday morning, as he sat in his office, sorting out papers on Winston's case, his phone vibrated on his desk. The number was unfamiliar, but intuition told me who it was. He answered without taking his eyes off the documents. "Hartvale," he said dryly. "This is Crowe." The detective's voice was as hoarse as it had been that day, but there was a note of satisfaction in it. "I have something for you. Can you drive up? It's best not to discuss this over the phone." Kyle froze, his fingers clenching around the handle. "What did you find?" he asked, trying to keep his voice even. "What you wanted, but you better see for yourself. I'm in my office. Come now if you can." "I'll be there in an hour." Kyle hung up without waiting for an answer. His heart beat faster than he expected. He stood up, grabbed his jacket, and threw it to Clara on the way out. "Cancel all meetings before lunch. I'll come back later." She looked at him with concern, but nodded. "Be careful, boss." Kyle didn't answer. He went down to the garage, got into his Lexus, and drove out onto the streets of Washington. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained gray, reflecting his mood. Austin's office looked as gloomy as it did on Monday, but today there was the fresh smell of coffee in the air instead of cigarette smoke. The detective was sitting at the table. In front of him lay a thin folder and several photographs fanned out. He looked up as Kyle entered and nodded towards the chair. "Sit down, Hartvale. We have a lot to talk about." Kyle sat up, his eyes immediately falling on the pictures. He couldn't make out the details from a distance, but his heart was already squeezing. "What is this?" he asked, pointing to the photographs. Austin moved them closer. "This is your wife and your friend. Last night, Silver Star Motel on the outskirts of town. Not the most luxurious place, but convenient for those who don't want to be noticed." Kyle took the top photo. It showed Celeste getting out of a car, her blonde hair shining under a streetlight, her coat draped over her shoulders. Declan stood nearby, his hand on her waist. The second shot was clearer. They were entering the room, Declan looking around, as if checking for witnesses. The third is the hardest. Celeste hugged him at the door, her face close to his, too close. Kyle felt the blood drain from his face. He put the photographs on the table, but his hands were shaking. "Is this really them?" he asked, although he knew the answer. "Right." Austin leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "I've been watching her since this morning. She told coworkers she was leaving for a meeting with a client, but drove straight to this motel. Forsyth arrived half an hour later. They stayed there for 2 hours. I didn't go inside, but I think you understand that they weren't playing chess there." Kyle was silent. He looked at the pictures, and each of them was like a blow to the chest. Celeste, Declan, his wife, and his best friend. This was not just a betrayal, it was the destruction of everything he believed in. He remembered their wedding, how Declan toasted, calling Celeste the best woman Kyle could find. I remembered how she laughed at his jokes, how the three of them spent evenings drinking wine and talking. And all this time. "Are you okay?" Austin's voice brought him back to reality. "No." Kyle clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. "But I can handle it." "What else?" Austin opened the folder and took out a sheet of notes. "I checked their calls. They have been calling each other regularly for the last 3 months. Short conversations, usually in the evening. Also, she was withdrawing money from an account that you don't seem to know about. Small amounts, but often. Maybe she paid for these meetings, or for silence." "Silence?" Kyle looked up. "Whose?" "I don't know yet," Austin shrugged. "But that's not all. I saw her calling someone after she left the motel. The conversation was short, but she looked worried. I wasn't able to intercept the number, but I can dig deeper if you want." Kyle nodded, his voice low and cold. "Dig. I want to know everything. Every detail." "It will cost," Austin warned. "Money is not a problem." Kyle took out another 1,000 in cash and threw it on the table. "Find me everything you can, and quickly." Austin grabbed the money without blinking an eye. As you say. But Hartvale, what are you going to do about it? He nodded at the photographs. You look like a man who is out for blood. Kyle stood up, scooped up the pictures into a folder, and tucked it under his arm. It's none of your business. Just do your job. He left the office without looking back. The rain began again, fine and nasty, but Kyle didn't notice. He got into the car, threw the folder on the passenger seat, and stared into space. His breathing was heavy, his chest felt tight, as if someone was squeezing his ribs. He slammed his fist onto the steering wheel, once, then again, until the pain in his hand drowned out the pain inside. Kyle didn't go home. He couldn't look at Celeste, not now. Instead, he headed to the bar where he was meeting Rowan. It was lunchtime, but he didn't care. He ordered a double whiskey and sat in the corner, away from the few customers. The folder lay in front of him, closed, but he felt its weight as if it were made of lead. Rowan came in half an hour later. She noticed him immediately. Her gaze slid over his face, over the empty glass, over the folder. Lord, Kyle, what's wrong with you? She asked, sitting down opposite. You look like you've been run over by a truck. I was with the detective. He moved the folder towards her. Open it. Rowan frowned, but obeyed. She scrolled through the pictures, her face becoming darker by the second. Damn, she breathed, closing the folder. I knew something was wrong. I'm sorry, Kyle. Don't apologize. He took a sip of the whiskey that had just been brought. It's not your fault. It's theirs. What are you going to do? Rowan leaned closer, her voice quiet. You're not just going to sit and be silent, are you? No, Kyle looked into her eyes, and there was something new in his gaze, not pain, but steel. I'll make them pay, both. And Mom and Dad, she bit her lip, if they knew. Then they too, he spoke calmly, but there was ice in his words. I won't stop, Ro. Not now. She nodded, leaning back in her chair. I'm with you. But be careful. Celeste is not stupid, but Declan. He's dangerous, Kyle. You know him better than me. Yes, Kyle grinned, but it wasn't funny. I thought I knew. They sat in silence for a few minutes until Rowan ordered a beer. Will you tell her? She asked finally. What do you know? Not yet. Kyle shook his head. Rowan raised the bottle in a toast. Then good luck, brother. You'll need it. Kyle nodded but didn't answer. He looked into the glass, imagining Celeste's face when she realized that he knew, and Declan's face when his world collapses. When he returned home late in the evening, Celeste was already asleep. He stood in the bedroom doorway, looking at her. She looked so peaceful, so innocent. Thursday passed for Kyle in a strange daze. He went to work, talked to clients, signed papers, but it was all like a dream. Photos from the Silver Star Motel sat in his office safe, locked with a code only he knew. He didn't want to keep them at home. The risk that Celeste would find them was too great. She behaved as if nothing had happened. She cooked breakfast, chatted about work, even suggested going to the cinema on the weekend. Every gesture, every word now seemed like a lie to him, and he hated himself for not being able to just grab her by the shoulders and shake out the truth. But he waited. Austin promised to dig deeper, but Kyle wanted to be sure. Not only in Celeste and Declan, but also in his family. Rowan's words about what Gideon and Marion might know couldn't leave her mind. If this is true, if they covered up treason for the sake of reputation, then the betrayal was not just personal, it was systemic, woven into the very essence of the Hartvales. In the evening, he decided to check it himself. Celeste had left for a meeting with a client or so, she said, and Kyle took advantage of the moment. He called Marion, knowing that she would be at home. Gideon usually stayed late into the night in the Senate, so this was a chance to talk to his mother alone. Kyle, dear, how unexpected. Her voice on the phone was warm, but with the usual note of control. You rarely call just like that. Did something happen? I want to stop by, he said, trying to sound natural. Talk. Haven't seen each other properly for a long time. Of course, come. Marion seemed pleased. I was just about to open a bottle of Chardonnay. It will be like old times. Kyle hung up the phone, feeling his stomach tighten, like old times. The mansion in Georgetown greeted him with silence and the smell of lavender. Marion adored scented candles. She was waiting for him in the living room, wearing a cream suit, with a glass of wine in her hand. Her gray hair was styled in a neat bun, and her smile was the same one she had honed over the years for social events. "Kyle, dear," she stood up, hugged him, lightly touching his cheek with her lips. "You look tired. Job?" "Yes, work." He sat down on the sofa, accepting the glass that she handed him. "And not only—" Marion narrowed her eyes, but kept her smile. "Anything else? You know you can tell me everything." Kyle took a sip of wine, feeling it burn his throat. He looked at her, trying to find a crack in her facade. Marion had always been a master at hiding her emotions, but he knew her too well. If she's lying, he'll notice. "Mom, I have a question," he began, putting the glass on the table. "Have you heard anything about Celeste? Any rumors?" She froze for a split second, her fingers lightly squeezing the stem of the glass. It was almost imperceptible, but Kyle caught it. "Rumors?" she asked. Her voice remained level. "What are you talking about, Kyle? Celeste is a wonderful wife. Everyone just talks about what a perfect couple you are." "Maybe," he leaned forward, not looking away, "but I heard something about her and Declan, that they communicate too closely." Marion laughed, briefly but sincerely, as if he had said something absurd. "Declan. Jesus, Kyle, that's your best friend. They have known each other for 100 years. Are you jealous?" "I'm not jealous." His tone became harsher. "I suspect. There is a difference, and I want to know if you heard something, or I saw it." She placed the glass on the table, her movements too careful. "No, dear, nothing like that. Celeste and Declan are just friends. You work too much, so you make things up." Kyle looked at her, and his heart sank. She was lying. He saw it in her eyes, a slight tension that she couldn't hide. There is a barely noticeable tremor in her voice. Marion knew. Maybe not everything, but definitely something. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "Because if it's true and you remain silent, it will be worse than you think." Her smile disappeared, replaced by a cold gaze. "What do you mean, Kyle? Are you accusing me of something?" "I don't blame." He stood up, feeling anger rising inside. "I'm asking. You are my mother. If something was wrong, you would have told me, right?" "Of course." She also stood up, her voice becoming sharper. "I would never betray you, son. You know that." "I know," Kyle nodded, but there was bitterness in his tone. "Just wanted to make sure." He turned to leave, but Marion stopped him, grabbing his hand. "Kyle, listen to me," she said, her voice becoming softer. "Don't look for problems where there are none. Celeste loves you. We all love you. Don't ruin it because of some stupid thoughts." He looked at her, and for a second he wanted to believe. But the pictures from the motel flashed into his memory, and he pulled away. "I'm not destroying, Mom. I'm finding out. There is a difference." She let go of his hand, her face unreadable. "Do as you please, but be careful. You don't understand what you're putting at stake." Kyle left without answering. Her last words echoed in his head as he walked to the car. "You don't understand what you're putting at stake." Was that a threat or a warning? He didn't know, but now he was sure. Marion was hiding something. And if she's involved, then Gideon most likely is too. Celeste has not returned home yet. Kyle sat in the living room, turning on the TV but not watching. His thoughts revolved around his conversation with his mother. She was lying, that was obvious. But why? To protect him? Or to protect your family? He remembered Rowan talking about the problem his parents were discussing. Maybe it was Celeste. Maybe they knew about the betrayal and decided to hush it up, as they did with any scandal. The phone rang. It was Austin. "Hartvale." The detective's voice was tense. "I have news. Are you home?" "Yes." Kyle stood up, clutching the phone. "What did you find?" "I checked your wife's calls after the motel." Austin spoke quickly. "She wasn't calling Declan. The number is registered to your mother, Marion Hartvale." The conversation lasted 3 minutes. Kyle felt the floor disappear from under his feet. "You are sure?" he asked, although he knew that Austin was not mistaken. "Absolutely, and that's not all. I found payments from her secret account. $10,000 went to T. Wilson. I don't know who it is yet, but I'm working on it." 10,000, Kyle repeated, his voice becoming hoarse. "When?" "A month ago, and another 5,000 2 weeks ago. It looks like blackmail or a bribe." Kyle was silent, processing this. Marion. Celeste called her after the motel. And money to whom? Declan or to someone else? "Keep digging," he finally said, "and keep an eye on my mother too. I want to know what she's doing." "This complicates things," Austin chuckled, "but I can handle it. Another 1,000 to go." "It will be tomorrow." Kyle hung up the phone without saying goodbye. He collapsed on the sofa, covering his face with his hands. His mother, his wife, his friend, everyone he loved, everyone he trusted, was part of this web. He didn't know how far it went, but now he was sure. The Hartveils were hiding more than he could have imagined. When Celeste returned home, he was sitting in the dark. She turned on the light, throwing her bag on the floor. "Kyle, why are you sitting here alone?" she asked, her voice light as always. "I think," he looked at her, and for the first time in days he felt not pain, but cold clarity. "About us, about family." She frowned, but smiled. "You've been strange lately. Maybe you should take a vacation." "Maybe," he stood up, walked up to her and looked into her eyes. "What about you?" She hesitated, but quickly pulled herself together. "To me? I'm fine. Just work." "Of course," Kyle nodded, retreating. "Good night, Celeste." He went into the bedroom, leaving her alone. She did not suspect anything or pretended to. Friday brought clear skies and a cold wind that blew leaves through the streets of Washington. Kyle woke up with a heavy head. Sleep came in fits and starts, interrupted by thoughts of Celeste, Declan, and Marion. He couldn't get Austin's words out of his head. His wife was calling her mother after the motel, and the money was going to an unknown T. Wilson. The name was spinning around in his head like a thorn, but he couldn't connect it to anything specific. "I couldn't yet." Celeste left early, again citing work. Declan. His best friend, his betrayer. Kyle knew he couldn't keep it to himself forever. He needed to see him, hear his voice, look into his eyes, and understand how far this lie went. He wrote Declan a short message. "Meet me at Old Ebbet at 1. We need to talk." The answer came 10 minutes later. "Sounds serious? I'll be there." Kyle clutched the phone in his hand, feeling anger rise within him. Seriously, Declan didn't even know how much. Or did you suspect? This thought only added fuel to the fire. The Old Ebbet Grill was one of the oldest bars in town. The dark wood, dim lighting, and smell of whiskey created an atmosphere where deals were made as often as glasses were knocked over. Kyle arrived early, taking a table in the corner, away from prying eyes. He ordered bourbon, but didn't drink it. He just twirled the glass in his hands, watching the light play in the amber liquid. His thoughts were sharp as a blade. What to say, how to start, how not to snap and grab Declan by the throat right there. Declan walked in at 1:15, late as always, with the same casual confidence that had once seemed charming to Kyle. A dark gray suit, an unbuttoned shirt, a smile that made women fall and men envied. He noticed Kyle, waved his hand, and walked over, plopping down on the chair opposite. "Well, what's the urgency, Hartveil?" he said, ordering a beer from a passing waiter. "You look like you lost the trial." Kyle looked at him, feeling his pulse beating in his temples. Declan was the same as always, relaxed, self-confident, with a slight mockery in his voice. But now Kyle saw him differently. It wasn't a friend. It was the enemy. "I don't lose cases," he said quietly, but there was something in his tone that made Declan narrow his eyes. "I wanted to talk about something else." "About what?" Declan took the beer they brought and took a sip. "Family? Job? Or have you finally decided to go into politics like Gideon wants?" "About Celeste," Kyle leaned forward, his voice deeper. "And about you." Declan froze, his hand holding the bottle stopping midway. He smiled, but the smile came out forced. Celeste? What's wrong with her? Is she okay? You know if she's okay. Kyle looked into his eyes without blinking. You see her often, right? Declan placed the bottle on the table, his face becoming serious. Kyle, what do you want to say? Lay it out straight. Okay, Kyle took one of the photographs out of his pocket, the one where Declan hugged Celeste at the motel door. He threw it on the table between them. Explain this. Declan looked at the photo and his face went pale. He quickly looked around to see if anyone was watching and leaned closer. Where did you get this? He asked, his voice becoming hoarse. None of your business. Kyle clenched his fists under the table. Answer. What were you doing with my wife at the motel? Declan ran a hand through his hair, his usual confidence beginning to crack. Listen, Kyle, it's not what you think. We're just what? Kyle raised his voice, causing a couple of heads to turn in their direction. He immediately lowered his tone, but the rage did not go away. Did they just meet behind my back? Just having sex in a cheap motel? Don't lie to me, Declan. I know everything. Declan swallowed, his eyes darting. It was a mistake, he said finally, almost in a whisper. Once, we drank and things got out of control. I didn't want to. Once, Kyle chuckled, but it wasn't funny. What about correspondence? What about calls? What about the meetings you hid? Is this also one time? Declan was silent, looking at the photo. Kyle could see him trying to come up with an excuse, but nothing came of it. Finally, he looked up. Kyle, I'm your friend. You know me. I didn't mean to hurt you. Friend? Kyle leaned in so close he could smell the beer on Declan's breath. Friends don't sleep with each other's wives. You betrayed me, Declan, and I want to know how long this has been going on. This isn't lasting, Declan leaned back, his voice sharper. It happened a couple of times. She came to me. I didn't start. Did she come to you? Kyle felt his anger turn into something colder, more dangerous. And you couldn't say no? Couldn't you call me and say, hey, Kyle, your wife is acting weird? I tried, Declan slammed his fist on the table, but quietly. But she said you wouldn't understand. That you're on edge and she doesn't know how to fix it. Kyle looked at him, and everything was boiling inside. He wanted to believe that Declan was a victim, that Celeste had seduced him. But he knew his friend too well. Declan never missed an opportunity. He was the predator, and Celeste was his prey or vice versa. You're lying, Kyle said calmly, and you know that I see it. Declan opened his mouth to argue, but Kyle interrupted. No need. I don't want any more of your excuses. Just tell me one thing. Did my family know? Declan froze, his gaze blank. What do you mean? He asked, but his voice trembled. Gideon, Marion, did they know? Did they cover for you? Kyle looked at him, and every second of silence felt like a blow. I don't know. Declan looked away. They didn't tell me anything. But Celeste once mentioned that Marion is aware, that she asked her to stop. Kyle felt his blood freeze in his veins. Marion, his mother. She knew and was silent. Maybe she even helped. He stood up, grabbed the photograph from the table, and put it in his pocket. You're a bastard, Declan, he said quietly. And if you think this is the end, you're wrong. Kyle, wait. Declan grabbed his hand, but Kyle pulled away. We can work this out. For the sake of old friendship. Friendship is dead. Kyle looked down at him. And you killed her. He walked out of the bar, leaving Declan sitting with his head down. The street greeted him with cold, but he didn't feel it. His mind was clearer than ever. Declan confessed not completely, but enough. Celeste was the initiator, or so he said. Marion knew. And Gideon? Kyle wasn't sure, but he was going to find out. At home, he found Celeste in the living room, with a glass of wine and a laptop on her lap. She looked up and smiled. You're late, she said. Job? Yes. Kyle threw the keys on the table, looking at her. Met with Declan. Her smile faltered, but she quickly pulled herself together. Oh, how is he? I haven't seen him for a long time. Is it true? Kyle came closer, His voice was cold. It seemed to me that you had met recently, in a motel, for example. Celeste turned pale, her fingers clenching her glass. What did you say? She asked, but her voice was shaking. Nothing. Kyle turned away, heading towards the stairs. Good night, Celeste. He left her down, feeling her gaze burning into his back. She knew he knew. And now the game has begun for real. It was a quiet Saturday morning in the Hartvale household, but the silence was deceptive, like the calm before the storm. Kyle woke up early, before the first rays of sun broke through the curtains. He lay in bed, looking at the ceiling while Celeste slept next to him. Her breathing was even, calm, and this infuriated him most of all. After yesterday's conversation, if it could be called a conversation, she didn't say a word. She just went to bed, leaving him with his thoughts buzzing and anger that he could barely contain. He got up, quietly dressed, and went downstairs. The coffee maker hummed, filling the kitchen with a bitter aroma, but he did not drink. Instead, he picked up his phone and texted Rowan. We need to meet, urgently. Where are you? The answer came a minute later. Home. Come. The door is open. Kyle grabbed the keys and left without leaving a note for Celeste. She would find a way to explain his absence, she always did. Rowan's apartment was in the Adams-Morgan neighborhood, in an old house with peeling paint and creaky stairs. It wasn't like the luxury of Georgetown, but Rowan loved the place for its soul, as she said. Kyle walked up to the third floor, pushed open the unlocked door, and entered. The inside smelled of coffee and fresh paint. Rowan was painting something on a canvas by the window, her hands smeared with blue gouache. She turned around when she saw him and frowned. Jesus, Kyle, you look worse than last time, she said, wiping her hands on her jeans. What's happened? I talked to Declan. Kyle collapsed onto the sofa, feeling the fatigue wash over him. He admitted. He said it happened a couple of times. And that Celeste started. Rowan froze, her eyes widening. Crap. Are you serious? And did you believe him? No, Kyle shook his head, his voice hoarse. He lied. I saw it in his eyes. It's not a couple of times. This lasts for months, maybe more. She came over, sat down next to him, and put her hand on his shoulder. Sorry, Kyle. I knew he was scum, but I didn't think he would stoop so low. What are you going to do? I'll make them pay. He looked at her, and there was steel in his gaze. Both. But that's not all. He said Marion knew. That Celeste talked to her about it. Rowan stumbled back, her hand slipping from his shoulder. Mother? Are you sure he didn't make it up to shift the blame? I'm not sure. Kyle took out his phone and showed her a message from Austin that had arrived at night. But the detective found the call. Celeste called Marion after the motel, and there are payments from her account to someone named T. Wilson. 10,000, then 5 more. Rowan read the text, her face darkening. T. Wilson, who the hell is this? And why did Mom get involved in this? I don't know, Kyle clenched his fists, but I talked to her yesterday. I asked about Celeste and Declan. She lied. Right in the face. She said she didn't know anything. Rowan stood up and began to walk around the room. Her movements were sharp. It looks like her. She always protects her family, even if it means lying to everyone. But if she knew, Kyle, that means they're all in on this. Dad, too? Perhaps. He rubbed his temples, feeling the headache return. I didn't ask him. Bye. But if Marion knew, then Gideon was hardly aloof. Rowan stopped and looked at him. Do you understand what this means? If they were covering for Celeste, that's more than just treason. This is a conspiracy. They chose reputation over you. Kyle nodded, his voice quiet but firm. Yes, and I won't forgive them for this. She sat back, her eyes sparkling with anger and something else, maybe fear. Kyle, I'm with you. You know it. But you have to be careful. They won't just give up. The Pope will destroy anyone who stands in his way. And Mom, she's more cunning than she seems. I know, he looked at her, and for the first time in days he felt warmth. Rowan was his anchor, the only person he could trust. That's why I need your help. What do you want? She leaned closer, Her voice became businesslike. "You're a journalist," Kyle said. "You have connections. Can you find out who T. Wilson is? And dig about the parents? Were there any rumors, payments, anything?" Rowan nodded, her lips forming a determined line. "I'll do it. I have a couple of Senate sources. And there's this guy at the bank who owes me a favor. Give me a couple of days." "Thank you, Ro." Kyle squeezed her hand. "You're the only one who didn't betray me." "I will never betray you," she squeezed his hand in response. "But you have to promise me something." "What?" "Don't do anything stupid until I find more." Her gaze hardened. "I know you, Kyle. You want to smash everything right now. But if we're going to get them, we need to be smarter." He wanted to object, but remained silent. She was right. His anger was like fire bright, but if released too soon, it would burn itself out. "Okay," he said finally. "I'll wait, but not for long." "We agree." Rowan stood up, went to the refrigerator, and took out 2 bottles of beer. "Now have a drink with me. You need to relax, at least for an hour." Kyle took the bottle, but didn't smile. He couldn't relax. Not now. But Rowan's presence gave him strength he didn't expect. In the afternoon, he returned home. Celeste was in the office or somewhere else. He no longer asked. He sat down at the table in his office, opened his laptop, and began to search for himself. T. Wilson was too generic a name, but he checked Declan's old contacts, Celeste's lists of colleagues, even Gideon's notes. Nothing. Either it was a pseudonym or someone outside their circle. The phone rang. Austin. Hartvale, the detective's voice was tense. "I have news. Are you sitting?" "Yes." Kyle squeezed the phone. "Speak." "I found T. Wilson." Austin coughed. "This is not a person. This is a company. Trade Wilson Limited. Registered in the Cayman Islands. And guess who one of the directors is?" "Who?" Kyle felt his pulse quicken. Austin fell silent, leaving the last word to Kyle. There was a short pause on the phone, drowned out only by the sound of his own heart. For Kyle Hartvale, everything he heard sounded like a sentence. Trade Wilson Limited, a company registered in the Cayman Islands, was nothing more than a front for Declan's schemes and machinations, and it was to this company's account that Celeste transferred large sums. Kyle, clutching the phone, felt as if he had received a second stab in the back after the betrayal. The blackmail story had now surfaced. He stood in his office by the window, looking at the early evening light that slid across the rooftops of Washington. The lights of the approaching evening sparkled behind the glass, but it seemed to Kyle that everything around was gloomy and meaningless. Everything he believed in friendship, family, marriage was coming apart at the seams. Perhaps he will now have to finish off this illusion himself. "Are you sure?" he asked finally, trying to speak evenly, although his throat seemed to be constricted. 100%, Austin boomed into the phone. "I checked the registers, accounts, and did a little reconnaissance through my channels. Trade Wilson Limited is formally owned by a chain of nominees, but the ultimate beneficiary is an offshore fund. And there are several people in the fund, including our dear Mr. Forsyth. Moreover, I have copies of documents that confirm that in recent years this structure has been used for gray transactions. Kickbacks, payments for silence, everything like that." Kyle was silent for a long time, feeling anger and fatigue mixing inside him into a caustic lump. Celeste transferred money, and obviously a lot of it, to T. Wilson. The money wasn't just going to some mysterious person, it was flowing straight to Declan. But why? "I think I'm starting to understand," he said finally, clearing his throat. "Damn blackmail." She decided, God, did she seriously believe that this was the best solution? "I can't say what she wanted to achieve," Austin answered a little softer. "But it is likely that Declan, while playing the role of lover, also kept her on the hook. Maybe he threatened her that he would tell everything to you, or, what is worse for her and for your family, that he would tell the press. Considering your name and its connections with a PR agency, the scandal could be enormous. Maybe that's what blackmail is all about. She pays him to keep quiet and not spill the dirt out. Perhaps he promised to hide evidence of the connection. And it seems that the parents at least guessed. Kyle nodded into the void, realizing the full scale of the betrayal. But they remained silent so that the Hartvale's reputation would not collapse. All of them. All except Rowan, of course. He closed his eyes tightly, remembering the expression on his father's face, the conversation with his mother. Now all the pieces of the puzzle fit together. Marion and Gideon found out about the affair, tried to stop Celeste, but realized that it was easier to hush up the situation secretly. Apparently, together with her, they hid everything from the press so that Gideon would not have a crack in the image of the great senator. In addition, Kyle himself remained in the dark. He was, in fact, the key to the ideal picture, where the family is the standard of political nobility. The Hartvale's future is more important than the feelings and dignity of their own son. Well, Hartvale, Austin said, I'll continue to keep you posted. I also have some other documents, but I haven't checked everything yet. If anything, you can call. Thank you, Austin. Kyle ended the call, carefully put the phone on the table, and closed his eyes, trying to find the last of his strength. He no longer felt either blind anger or the desire for immediate revenge. Rather, I felt a peaceful emptiness in which a single call was heard. All this needs to be completed, and finish it in such a way that you no longer return to pain and dirt. When he opened his eyes, his gaze fell on the photo on his desk, a dusty shot of him and Celeste standing on their wedding day at a white arch decorated with flowers, smiling at each other. Then they looked like ideal newlyweds on the pages of a glossy magazine, both beautiful, both rich, both talented in their field. But now the photo has become a symbol of lies, behind which lay ambition, power, and a thirst for control. He reached for the frame and turned it face down. That night, he went to see Rowan. Making his way through the illuminated streets at night, he only thought that he didn't want to talk to anyone else except his sister. She lived on the other side of town, and the journey took a good 40 minutes, but Kyle didn't even notice how he drove the entire distance, lost in his thoughts. Rowan met him at the door of her apartment in the same t-shirt with a provocative slogan and pajama pants, with a brush in her hair, and she smelled slightly of paint. Apparently, she was painting something again. Before Kyle could say a word, she reached out and pulled him into a hug. I feel like you have news, she said in a low voice, and hardly any good ones. Kyle stood motionless, holding her close to him. Once again, he was grateful to fate that he had this younger sister, the only ray of light in the family's ideal world. Finally, he pulled away and said in a muffled voice, a sea of news, and they're all rotten, Ro. She motioned for him to come inside, and they walked into a small, cozy living room with paintings and cans of paint scattered everywhere. Rowan motioned for him to sit on the old but comfortable sofa, and she sat down in the chair opposite her, her legs tucked under her. Tell me, she said softly. And he told me about Trade Wilson Limited, about blackmail, about the fact that the company is connected with Declan, about the money that Celeste transferred there. He ended with the fact that the parents most likely knew all this time, but hid the truth so that no one would tarnish the Hartvale family name. Are you saying, Rowan asked, frowning, that our dear Declan not only stole your wife, but also blackmailed her in order to get money? She has nowhere to go, because if she stops paying, what will he do? He'll leak the story to the press, Kyle answered with a bitter smile. Or me. Plus, perhaps he has photographs, correspondence, who knows? After all, he is a specialist in political technologies. He always knew how to play on the weaknesses of others. Apparently, the casual affair is just a way to take control of Celeste. Or they started together, and then everything went wrong. Now she pays to keep him from making a public scandal. Disgusting, Rowan said quietly, slamming her fist on the armrest. And where are the parents in this place? They seem to have warned her that they wouldn't allow any fuss. Maybe they even gave me money or prepared a plan. Kyle clenched his fists. Maybe Declan threatened them too, hinting that if everything came to light, he would hit Gideon directly. And Dad is now at the top of his popularity after his healthcare reform. Do you remember how noisily they celebrated the passage of the bill? And how was our hero senator praised? They don't need a scandal. Disgusting, Rowan stood up and began walking around the room back and forth. I have no words. I would like to say that I am shocked, but to be honest, all this is so similar to our family. No one thinks about feelings, there is only politics, influence, power. Kyle ran his hands over his face, feeling the fatigue growing by the minute. He was tired of delving into abomination and deception. He wanted only one thing, to get out of this lie, break this vicious circle, and start living again. Ro, he said, lowering his hands, I decided that I won't dig anymore. I'll just file for divorce. Rowan stopped, eyes wide. Divorce? Yes. I don't want to understand their schemes anymore or look for someone to blame. Obviously, everyone is to blame. Celeste betrayed me, Declan betrayed me, my parents betrayed me. Enough already. I have irrefutable evidence of betrayal, those pictures that Austin took, the messages. This is enough for me to get a divorce for good reason. From a moral point of view, everything is even more clear. The sister silently walked up to him, sat down next to him, and squeezed his hand in hers. You know, she finally said, I understand your decision. If you keep digging, you'll only get deeper into the mud. And so, you can at least leave, take what is rightfully yours, and leave them with it all. Kyle frowned, remembering how he and Celeste drew up a prenuptial agreement. Her parents insisted on this many years ago. The contract protected the interests of both parties, but also implied that if one of the spouses was guilty of adultery, the second had the right to claim a significant part of the property. Kyle wasn't too concerned about money, but there were other assets, joint real estate, and some investments. Celeste, with her share in a PR agency, was also far from poor. But the question is not only about money, the question is to break everything. And I will stop communicating with my parents, he added harshly. They covered it all up. This is too much for me. It's better to let them continue to create their ideal image, but without me. I take myself off their list of priorities. Rowan looked at him with wide eyes. Of course, the decision was difficult. To sever ties with the family, to renounce not only the title of crown son of a senator, but also from the usual trips to the mansion, from dinner parties, from a seemingly luxurious, but in fact deceitful family life. But she understood that for Kyle such a break was the only way to save himself. I will support you, she said firmly. Kyle felt grateful and quietly relieved. He pressed his sister's hand to his heart and whispered with closed eyes, Thank you, Ro. You are everything to me now. And at that moment he realized that, despite the bitterness of loss and deception, he still had a chance for a new life, albeit without Celeste, without parents, and without trust in the people who betrayed him, but with one single close soul with whom they had been in the same boat since childhood. On Monday morning, Kyle drove up to the house where he and Celeste had lived for the past 3 years. It was a substantial mansion in the historic district of Washington, with columns at the entrance and a well-kept garden in the yard. Once upon a time, they chose it together. Celeste wanted more space for dinner parties, and Kyle dreamed of a separate office overlooking the river. Now this whole house seemed like an empty set for a play about a happy marriage. He walked inside, expecting that Celeste had already left for work. But, to his surprise, he found her in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, but was in a formal suit and seemed to be about to leave. When she saw Kyle, she shuddered a little, as if she didn't think that he would return so early. Hello, she squeezed out a tight smile, looking up at him. You didn't spend the night at home? No, Kyle answered coldly. He was ready for the conversation he was about to start, but her question only increased his irritation. Why on earth is she asking? Celeste placed her cup on the table, slowly standing up. She looked tired, there were shadows under her eyes, and there was not a trace of lipstick on her lips. Kyle, listen. She began, but stopped short. No, let me tell you, he took a deep breath, suppressing the desire to scream or destroy the kitchen. I know about your affair with Declan. I know that you transferred money to him. I know that you deceived me for 6 months. He spoke measuredly, quietly, almost without emotion, but every word sounded like a sentence. Celeste turned pale, her lips trembled. Listen, it's not that simple. She spoke quickly, trying to find excuses. I wanted to stop. I didn't know how to tell you. He threatened me. Threatened with what? He interrupted. Will he tell everyone that you are lovers? Will he tell the press? Will this be the scandal of the century? Celeste nodded, her eyes filled with panic. Yes, she whispered. He said that if I left him, he would sell the story to journalists. And your parents, they found out. Your mother overheard our conversation, and then, I don't know, for some reason she decided that it was better to keep everything a secret. She said it would be safer for everyone. I didn't want to lose everything. Lose everything, Kyle repeated, sighing heavily. But in the end, you will lose a lot more. She took a step towards him, but he pulled away. Kyle, listen. I was driven into a corner. He really did threaten. He said that he would destroy your career, the reputation of Senator Gideon, and devalue your entire family brand. You could have told me the truth, he said harshly. I am your husband. At least it was, and I could understand, could help. I was afraid, Celeste sobbed. Your family never forgives mistakes. Gideon would destroy me if this came out. And Declan, he apparently wanted not only sex, but also money. Kyle felt furious again, remembering the documents from Austin. Yes, her connection with Declan was not just a petty affair. There were serious blackmail threads stretching to the political heights. That's enough, he said coldly, so as not to succumb to emotions. I'm filing for divorce. Celeste shook her head, her eyes widening. Wait, Kyle, don't do it so quickly. Maybe we'll find a way out. You don't want the whole town talking about it. They'll talk like that anyway, he smiled bitterly. But I don't care anymore. I'm not going to keep your secret. That is, I'm not going to publicly talk about you and Declan, but I also don't intend to cover for you, pretending that everything is fine. I'm tired. He paused before saying the final sentence. You can pack your things. You have a week. I will leave now. I will return to this house when I submit the official papers. But Celeste approached him, trying to grab his hand. Kyle, I'm still, deep down. She saw a coldness in his eyes that wasn't there before. Once upon a time, he looked at her with tenderness, respect, and love. Now all that's left is emptiness. It's over, Celeste, he snapped. I know your parents knew. I know Declan got your money. I know that everyone I trusted lied to me. And now I want only one thing for you all to disappear from my life. She began to sob, hiding her face in her hands, but Kyle did not feel an ounce of pity. There has been too much pain over the past months, too many disappointments. He turned away and walked out, slamming the front door. That evening, he headed to his parents' mansion in Georgetown. Kyle felt that he needed to tell them, and personally, to their faces, that he no longer wanted to be part of this family. And although this made him feel terrible, he realized that this meeting was inevitable. The house greeted him with a sleek marble staircase and shining chandeliers. Somewhere from the depths of the mansion, a quiet hum of voices could be heard. Apparently, the father was discussing something on the phone. Marion was the first to come out to him. Her posture was straight, her face was calm, only tension was splashing in her eyes. Kyle, she greeted him, trying to smile, but the smile came out forced. I thought you were angry. I'm not just angry, Mom, he answered. I'm furious, and I need to talk to both of you. Now. Marion lowered her eyes, smoothing the folds of her perfect dress, and led him into the living room. Gideon was already waiting there, whiskey in hand. It was clear that he had just finished a telephone conversation. Perhaps his interlocutor was one of the influential people who decided the fate of the country or party funds. But now Senator Hartvale turned to his son, sighed, and put his glass on the table. Kyle, he said in a low voice that usually silenced entire rooms, we were waiting for you. I understand that you already know a lot. Kyle involuntarily clenched his fists, remembering how proud he had recently been of his father. He was strong, charismatic, pushed through reforms, and knew how to inspire people. But now in front of him stood not a hero, but a man ready for any lie for the sake of power and reputation. Let's start without lying, Kyle said without moving from his place. You knew about Celeste's betrayal. They knew that she and Declan were lovers. They knew that he was blackmailing her. And yet they remained silent. Also that your career, Dad, does not suffer. Gideon frowned, as if trying to object further, but noticing his son's gaze, he realized that it was pointless to deny the obvious. We wanted the best. Marion entered. There was a barely noticeable trembling in her voice. Understand, Kyle, if this story became public, the media would tear us to pieces. Investigations would begin. Haters would attack Gideon, your name. My name? He interrupted with a bitter smile. I don't care about the name if everything is rotten inside. Have you thought about me? About how I feel when I find out my wife is cheating with my best friend? Kyle, please. Gideon stepped towards him. Son, understand, in politics, everything is not so simple. Sometimes you have to sacrifice personal interests for the common good. If this scandal had come to light, my social reform committee would have been taken away, and I would not have been able to continue working on projects. And I want to help people. Kyle felt the old anger flare up inside him. It's always the same thing. I wanted the best. The common good, family is above all. But in fact, they sacrificed precisely him, their son, his feelings, his honor, so that clouds would not gather over the Hartvale family. Everything is clear to me, he said quietly. You haven't thought for a minute about how I will live with this lie. If only dirty details would not come out, if only Gideon would remain in the Senate and Marion would continue to shine at social events. You've always been harsh, Marion exhaled, sinking onto the sofa. But understand us. We are parents and try to protect our children, even if it means not telling the truth. Protect? There was bitterness in Kyle's voice. You protected anyone, but not me. Because if you wanted to protect me, you would have told the truth, divorced Celeste and me, and kicked Declan out of our lives. But you chose to cover up the betrayal so that, God forbid, there would be no noise. Gideon stood with his hands clasped behind his back. His stern face with sharp features, which always seemed to be the personification of power, now looked confused. Well, he said finally, what are you going to do? I have already filed for divorce, and I leave the Hartvale family. These words sounded sharp and clear. Marion opened her mouth slightly. Gideon turned pale. What does leaving the family mean? Marion asked almost in a whisper. You can't stop being our son. I can't remove your blood from my veins, said Kyle, but I can stop communicating with you. I don't want to play this lie anymore. I don't want to come to dinners, pretend that we are a friendly family, while for your own purposes you are ready to push me into the basement of your conscience and lock me there so that I don't interfere. These are emotions, Gideon intervened quietly, lowering his voice. We'll sort it out. Celeste will disappear, Declan will disappear. We have connections, we will agree so that this story does not come up. And you will continue your career, and over time everything will calm down. These are not emotions. This is a decision, Kyle snapped, without looking away. I'm not interested in your politics anymore. I'm not going to the Senate. I don't want to become part of the Hartvale dynasty that you kept talking about. Continue your career yourself. Don't drag me in. Think about it, son, Gideon said desperately. You were born for more. You can become someone important. Influence, power. At the cost of your own soul? Kyle asked sharply. No, thank you. He looked around the room. Luxurious paintings, expensive furniture, porcelain figurines in display cases. Once upon a time, all this amazed his imagination, but now it seemed only scenery for a farce. Goodbye, he concluded. Don't look for me. I will live my life. Marion covered her face with her hands. Gideon froze like a drawn statue. Kyle turned and walked out of the living room and then out of the house, feeling like he was throwing off the shackles of the past with every step up the marble steps. The next few weeks turned into a whirlwind of legal formalities for Kyle. He filed for divorce and attached to the lawsuit the collected evidence of infidelity. Photographs from the motel, copies of correspondence, a report from a private detective. According to the terms of the marriage contract, in the event of infidelity of one of the parties, the other received a significant part of the jointly acquired property. In addition, Kyle could have qualified for alimony, but this did not matter to him. He just wanted it to be over and for nothing to tie him to Celeste anymore. He also had to unearth a number of financial documents relating to the house and some joint investments. The lawyers he hired acted clearly and quickly. Celeste's lawyer tried to bargain, but Kyle's evidence was too overwhelming. Moreover, it seems that Celeste did not have the strength to resist. She never even called Kyle. She only signed the necessary papers, silently agreeing to the terms. The meeting with her in court was casual. Kyle barely glanced in her direction. She looked haggard, without makeup, with a dull look. After the hearing, she tried to approach him. "Kyle," she said quietly as he waited at the exit, "I have nothing to say in my defense. I'm just sorry it turned out this way." He didn't answer. He just looked at her in such a way that she herself understood. Everything was over between them. The dialogues were over. The end was set. When, after the final hearing, the court officially dissolved the marriage, Kyle felt pain squeezing his heart despite all the hatred for betrayal. He once loved her. However, now this pain also meant liberation. They officially became strangers. He stopped maintaining contact with his parents altogether. Gideon called a couple of times and left messages saying that he was bored and wanted to discuss the current situation, but Kyle deleted these messages without listening to the end. Marion wrote short texts, suggested talking calmly, and apologized, but Kyle ignored them. He did not change his last name, yet he was and remained Hartvale, no matter how much he crossed himself out of family life. But to emphasize the distance, Kyle once spoke publicly at a local charity and declared that he was no longer involved in his father's political ambitions and that he wanted to focus solely on his legal career and volunteer projects. This step aroused a certain curiosity among the press, but the very next day a new news feed appeared, and they began to forget about it. Gideon may have managed to reach an agreement with his journalist acquaintances so as not to make a fuss about the family conflict. Several months have passed. Kyle sold the house in the historic district. There were too many memories, and under the terms of the divorce he still had the right to the main share in this property. Having earned a decent sum, he bought an apartment in a skyscraper with a view of the Potomac and where no one would remind him of the past. In the office of Hartvale and Partners, the law firm he headed, he put things in order and hired several new talented lawyers. He made Clara a senior assistant and increased her salary. Work absorbed him headlong, and time passed unnoticed. Rowan was the only family member with whom he remained in close contact. She sometimes came to him in the evenings. They had dinner together, drank wine. She talked about her journalistic investigations and paintings, and he shared stories from the courtroom. His sister was a true friend for him. She listened without judgment, helped with advice. If Rowan noticed that he had a sad look, she suggested joining him in a bar or taking a walk along the embankment at night, and this worked better than any therapy. The Declan story eventually died down. He left Washington, as far as Kyle knew, moved to New York or something to do political consulting there. He probably clung to the remaining connections, but in their general circle they hardly talked about him. Celeste also disappeared from view. Perhaps she was trying to recover from the scandal and breakup. Kyle didn't want to know the details. All that mattered to him was that his life now belonged to him alone. So a year and a half passed. During this time, Kyle managed to win several high-profile cases, earning a reputation as a court shark who practically never loses. He was sometimes referred to in the press as the son of the legendary Senator Gideon Hartvale, but he tried to distance himself from such comparisons. I was happy to help a non-profit foundation dedicated to protecting women's rights. It seemed that peace reigned in his life, although somewhere deep inside there was still a shadow of resentment and disappointment. One evening, as he was about to leave the office, Clara came in and said that he had an appointment with a potential client, a certain Mr. Fisher. He came without an appointment, but persisted, claiming that the matter was urgent. Sighing, Kyle agreed to take it. Work was a good way to not be alone with his demons. The meeting with Mr. Fisher was surprisingly productive. He needed a smart and experienced lawyer to defend him in a complex financial dispute. However, even more unexpected was his companion, whom he introduced as his public relations advisor, a girl named Alice Grant. The first moment she walked into the office, Kyle thought he might have seen her before. Or is it just a figment of the imagination? Tall, with light brown hair and chiseled features, there was something ironic and warm in her gaze that set her apart from the other glamorous PR girls Kyle had met. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Hartvale," she said, extending her hand. Her voice was calm and confident. "Just Kyle," he corrected, deciding that there was no point in being formal when they were in such a small circle. "Take a seat." They quickly discussed the details of the case, and Alice made sound comments regarding how the press might interpret the actions of Mr. Fisher and his opponents. It was clear that she understood media issues and knew how to think strategically. Kyle couldn't help but be surprised. He usually felt uncomfortable around PR specialists. Celeste, of course, came to mind. But Alice spoke easily, without trying to dominate. After the meeting, Mr. Fisher left first, and Alice lingered, clarifying some details regarding the deadlines for documents. When they were alone, she smiled, closing the folder. "Thank you, Kyle. I have heard a lot about your company and am glad that Mr. Fisher decided to contact you. I hope we won't disappoint him." Kyle nodded, leading her to the door. "If you have questions about PR, my assistant Clara is at your disposal. I prefer not to get too deep into media strategies." Alice looked at him for a moment. "Yes, I heard that you do not like publicity, but sometimes it can be useful, especially if you need to defend the truth." Kyle smiled weakly. He once led a public life through the prism of his family, and it brought him only pain. But maybe Alice is right in her own way. "We'll see," he answered, opening the door for her. "I will be glad to cooperate." A week later, Kyle and Alice met again, this time on business. Mr. Fisher asked for help with several documents, and Kyle called Alice to agree on the wording from a media risk perspective. The meeting was held in a small conference room at Hartwell and Partners. When the discussion ended, Alice suggested, "Maybe we can have lunch together. I know a good restaurant nearby. Otherwise, we keep talking about documents, but we need to distract ourselves at least a little." Kyle thought about it. Previously, having heard something like this from a PR woman, he would have immediately refused so as not to remind himself of the past. But there was something different about Alice, a lack of excessive assertiveness, a sincere desire to just communicate. He even became curious. "Why not?" he replied. The restaurant turned out to be cozy. Wooden tables, dim lighting, quiet music in the background. They chose a table in the corner. When the waiter took the order, Alice asked, "Kyle, let me ask a personal question. I heard that you are the son of Senator Gideon Hartwell, but you are not at all on his political team. Is this a conscious choice?" Kyle rested his elbows on the table, intertwining his fingers. The question was painful, but he decided to answer honestly. "Yes, consciously. My family, we have a complicated relationship. I don't want to follow in their footsteps anymore. I enjoy practicing law. Do you mind that everyone around you refers to you as the son of a senator?" He shrugged slightly. "People in this country love labels. Over time you get used to it, but this no longer works for me." Alice nodded understandingly. "Probably, I understand. I also have a family with some skeletons in the closet. But now I'm trying to build everything on my own 2 feet, so." She smiled warmly, and there seemed to be no hint of ambiguity or hidden intentions in that smile. Kyle felt a quiet echo of something long-forgotten sympathy arise somewhere inside. After the betrayal he experienced, he closed himself off from any romantic thoughts, but now he suddenly caught himself enjoying her company. That he wants to know more about her, to hear her laugh, and it was unexpectedly good. They had lunch and talked not only about Mr. Fisher's case, but also about many other things, about how Alice began her career in a small PR agency, about the fact that she had a beloved dog named Whitney, about Rowan's paintings. She had seen a couple of reports about exhibitions where the work of Kayla's sister was shown, about local bars and music. There is no pressure like old acquaintances who are simply comfortable being around. "I'm surprised," she admitted, leaning back in her chair when dessert was served, "that you even agreed to this dinner. You have a reputation for avoiding public events." "I guess I'm trying to change my habits," he admitted quietly, "or at least try to do it." Alice smiled knowingly, and approval was visible in her gaze. When they left the restaurant, Washington greeted them with cool air and the sound of cars rushing along the busy streets. "Thank you for the company," she said, stopping at the entrance. "I think we should do it again. But next time, if you don't mind, I would take you to an interesting place. Art readings are sometimes held there. I think this might interest you." Kyle nodded briefly, trying to keep a neutral expression on his face, although something inside was pleasantly trembling with anticipation. "Agreed. As soon as we have a little less work on Fisher." They exchanged light handshakes, but it was clear in their eyes that these were not just business partners. Perhaps this was the beginning of something new. Over the next few months, their acquaintance with Alice developed slowly. At first, they saw each other in the office from time to time and discussed business. Then they began to go to lunch together more often, and then more informal meetings arose. One evening, she invited Kyle to a contemporary art exhibition. The paintings were abstract, sometimes shocking, but Kyle liked how vividly Alice reacted to what she saw. She was sincere, without lies or posturing. Gradually, their relationship grew into an easy friendship, or maybe not so easy, because mutual sympathy was increasingly apparent between them. Kyle did not rush things. Every time he felt an inner fear that he might again be betrayed or drawn into a lie, he would remind himself with an effort of will that Alice was not Celeste. She is a different person. She has no visible desire to manipulate. At least that's what it seemed like. Rowan, of course, noticed that her brother was increasingly disappearing in the evenings and sometimes walked around with a slightly dreamy look. One day she came to his office and, sitting down on the sofa in the reception area, looked around with a smile. "Look, you've become more comfortable here, boss." "And what is the reason for such changes?" Kyle, taking the hint, grinned, gesturing for her to go into the office. "The reason is Clara's excellent work," he joked. "By the way, you can give her a compliment. She will be happy." Rowan narrowed her eyes skeptically. "Clara, of course, is great, but isn't she the one who causes that special sparkle in your eyes?" Kyle shook his head, walking over to the window and putting his hands behind his back. "Okay, spit it out," the sister demanded. "Kyle, I see that you have become different. Calmer, happier, and I have a suspicion that there's more to it than just work." He turned to her, sighing. "Yes, there is one girl, Alice. For now, we're just... well, we communicate, we're friends, we go to exhibitions and readings together. I feel like I care about her." "Oh, yes, yes, yes," Rowan exclaimed, smiling. "My guess is correct. And how is she?" "Good, very. Doesn't look like Celeste. More sincere, heartfelt. I don't know what will happen next. I don't want to rush, but I really feel good with her." Rowan looked at him with tenderness in her eyes. "Brother, I'm glad. You deserve happiness. Do you think she knows about your past? About all these family squabbles?" Kyle shrugged. "Partly yes. She knows that I am on bad terms with my parents, that I was married. But he didn't tell me the details. I don't want to burden her with all this dirt." Rowan came closer and said quietly, "Someday you will have to. But you're right, there's no need to ruin all this with revelations now. If she understands and accepts you along with your past, then she is worth moving on." Kyle nodded, feeling grateful that his sister understood his hesitation. He had already made a mistake once when he brought Celeste into his life, being blinded by feelings. "I didn't want to step on the same rake a second time, so I approached carefully." Time passed. Client Fisher won his dispute in court with the active participation of Kyle and competent PR support from Alice. As a thank you, Mr. Fisher arranged a small buffet at an elite restaurant where he invited both lawyers and consultants. Kyle, although he didn't like such parties, decided to go, partly out of professional solidarity, partly to spend another evening in Alice's company. When he entered the hall, she was already there, in an elegant black dress. When she saw him, she smiled a little warmer than they usually smile at just colleagues. The evening passed in conversation about all sorts of trifles, congratulations, and toasts. At some point, when the noise reached its peak, Alice approached him with her glass of wine. "Let's go out onto the balcony," she suggested. "It's too stuffy here." They climbed out onto a spacious balcony overlooking the city at night. Washington was sparkling with lights. Somewhere in the distance, the Capitol was visible. The lights of cars stretched in an endless line. The air was cool, but after the stuffy hall, it seemed refreshing. "How do you feel?" Alice asked, standing next to him at the parapet. "You can't stand these events." "Yes, there is a little," Kyle admitted, "but today is not bad. I think because there is a reason to stay." He looked at her. They stood quite close, and he could smell the subtle aroma of her perfume. My soul became quiet, calm, and at the same time exciting. She smiled, taking the hint. "You probably think I'm intruding, but I really wanted to talk to you face to face." "I'm glad you did," he answered softly. "What did you want to talk about?" Alice bit her lip slightly, as if contemplating how to formulate the thought. "Kyle, it seems to me that you and I have become closer lately, and I like it. But I feel like there is an invisible wall around you. You always keep your distance, afraid to become vulnerable. I understand this, believe me, I have guessed why this is so. But I want you to know that I don't want to use your past. I don't want to delve into your family scandals. I just feel good with you, and I hope it's mutual." Kyle was silent, feeling the warmth spreading in his chest. Alice's words sounded so sincere without pressure. She saw his barriers, but did not try to break through them with force. "Thank you," he said finally. "It means a lot to me. I'm really too careful." He lowered his eyes, remembering the lesson that life had taught him. The betrayal of Celeste and Declan, the cold calculation of his parents, all this left him alone. But Alice was opening the way to a different future. "Do you mind if I touch you?" she suddenly asked quietly, looking away. Kyle looked at her. Such a question brought trepidation. She was afraid to frighten him or to impose herself. He answered, nodding slightly, and she carefully placed her hand on his arm. Warm, light touch. They didn't need to say anything more. Something timid and important seemed to sparkle in the air. Thus began a story that gradually revived Kyle's belief that he could love and be loved again. At night, when he and Alice talked on the phone or sat on the veranda of her apartment, he talked about childhood memories, about his success in law school, about incompetent judges and tough opponents in cases, but he still did not dare to talk about what had been tormenting him inside for years. One day, after more than 6 months of their relationship, when they were sitting at his house, watching a movie and lazily discussing plans for the weekend, she felt that he was worried about something. He often looked away from the screen and frowned. "Kyle," she said affectionately, touching his shoulder, "it looks like you're not watching the movie." "Sorry." He closed his eyes for a moment and seemed to make up his mind. "Alice, I have been wanting to tell you something for a long time. I don't want it to come as a surprise if you accidentally read it somewhere in an archive or hear it from someone." She turned down the volume on the TV and turned to him, crossing her legs. "Okay, I'm listening." And Kyle told me, without going into unnecessary details, but so that she understands the essence, about the political family, about Celeste's betrayal, about blackmail on the part of Declan, about the fact that his parents hid all this for the sake of their reputation, and that is why he turned away from them. He spoke for several minutes, and when he finished, he looked at Alice, holding his breath. He was afraid to see horror or condemnation in her eyes. But she, on the contrary, looked at him with sympathy and understanding. "Damn," she said quietly, "you've endured so much. I'm sorry you had to go through that. I don't ask for pity," he added hastily. "I just want you to know why I'm so secretive and careful." She came closer to him and wrapped her arms around his neck. "If you think this will make me look at you differently, no, it won't. I respect your path and your decision. Having to cut ties with your parents must have been difficult. If you ever decide you want to talk to them again, I'll support you. Or if you don't want to, I'll also support you. Thank you, he whispered. You have no idea how important this is to me. They sat like that, hugging each other, for a long time in silence. The invisible ice inside Kyle slowly melted. It was scary to believe in something good again, but Alice made it clear that she would not betray him and would not use his weaknesses against him. 2 years is enough time for the city to forget about Kyle and Celeste's high-profile divorce, so that Senator Gideon has time to be re-elected and carry out a couple more initiatives, and Kyle can finally settle into his new life. During this time, he and Alice became truly close. First, they moved in together, renting a spacious apartment not far from Kyle's office, so that it would be convenient for both of them to get to work. Then they decided to buy a house together, not a luxurious mansion, but a cozy two-story cottage in a green area where they could walk with Whitney, Alice's dog, and have a barbecue with Rowan when she arrived. The most important thing is that Kyle felt that he was happy. He had strong relationships built on mutual respect and trust. He had an interest in work that brought not only money, but also satisfaction, and he had a calm conscience. No one blackmailed him or tried to use him. He became himself Kyle Hartvale and not son of Gideon, husband of Celeste, or part of the perfect family. He did not communicate with his parents except for one case. When Gideon was hospitalized with a heart attack, Rowan called Kyle, informing him about it. Kyle was tormented by doubts about whether to visit his father. As a result, he came to the hospital but remained in the corridor, not daring to enter the ward. He saw his mother sitting next to Gideon, who was holding her hand. Her face was sad. It was some kind of someone else's picture. This pain did not belong to them, not to him. He turned around and left, feeling that he was not yet ready for reconciliation. Perhaps sometime in the future. Rowan, visiting them for another barbecue, watched as Alice and Kyle laughed at some stupid joke about the company's documents. The sister said with a smile, I can't believe that just a couple of years ago everything was in such crap. Look at you. You look like you're living the dream. Kyle shrugged, putting his arm around Alice's waist. I wouldn't call it a dream, more like ordinary happiness. But after everything that happened, this is quite enough. Well, I don't know, Rowan winked. Ordinary happiness is sometimes greater than any ambition. She went to put another painting on a portable easel in their yard, and Alice, smiling, turned to Kyle. You know, I recently thought that I would like to get to know your sister better. But in my opinion, we are almost like friends. She adores you, Kyle assured. Rowan is not that simple, but if she likes you, she can become a friend for life. Alice smiled, pressing herself against his shoulder for a moment. An ordinary peaceful scene on a Saturday afternoon, but for Kyle it was priceless. Sometimes, Kyle still woke up at night from dreams where he saw Celeste laughing with Declan, or dreams about his mother who begged him to forgive his family, but he could not answer. But dreams remain dreams, and in reality, Kyle felt that he had long ago made a choice to live without lies and without fear. Somewhere far away in Washington, new Senate hearings were thundering. People were quoting Gideon, praising his new bills. The press may have occasionally mentioned that the senator has an eldest son with whom he has a complicated relationship, but no one really cared. And Kyle himself no longer cared either. Exactly 2 years to the day since the night he told Celeste, "You can pack your things," Kyle stood at the window of his new home, looking out at the sunrise. Alice was still sleeping in the bedroom on the second floor. Rowan promised to come in the evening and arrange a small celebration in honor of their move. Smiling to himself, Kyle took a sip of his coffee and listened to Whitney's quiet barking in the yard. In his hands was a thin sheet of paper, a letter received the other day. It was from my mother. In it, Marion again asked for a chance to talk, assured that she missed him, that Gideon would like to see his son and ask for his forgiveness. Kyle reread the letter and felt a slight pang of pain and nostalgia. But then he folded it and put it in the desk drawer, still without an answer. He was not ready to return to that world. Perhaps someday he will find the strength to meet, but not now. Footsteps were heard upstairs. Alice woke up. Soon she, yawning and stretching, came down, walked up to him, and, hugging him by the waist from behind, asked, "Have you been standing here for a long time?" "A couple of minutes," he replied, putting the letter away. "I was just admiring the sunrise." She pressed her cheek against his back. "We have a lot to do today, remember?" "I remember," Kyle grinned. "We need to buy more furniture, meet Rowan, and there's still some work left to do." "And then you can market, celebrate our future?" Alice asked, looking into his eyes. "Yes," he ran his hand through her hair. "Our future." Her eyes lit up with joy, and at that moment, Kyle realized with quiet confidence that his decision not to get bogged down in revenge, not to plunge into dirty intrigues, but to simply leave, break the rotten ties, and then, step by step, build a new life was correct. He escaped the trap of hatred and gave himself the right to happiness. And although the scars of the past still remained, they no longer ruled his life. Now she was filled with warmth, trust, and hope, and nothing could be stronger than this new faith that, having once lost, he was able to find a second attempt at happiness. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.